Hi, this is Sue, and welcome to the English class. We're going to get started today talking about fiction, as I promised you the other day in the introduction that I did. So today we're going to start talking about the fiction section, and we're going to cover 6 different units. And what are those units going to be in the fiction section? Well, we're going to first start talking about plot, which is basically the storyline. That involves knowing the events of the story, what happens, and, first this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And of course, typically we follow the arrow of time and we go from past to present to future. But if you think about it, the movie Memento actually went backwards in time. So it always isn't a forward moving thing. So the first topic is talking about plot, the event structure of fiction. The second unit is going to cover inferences, which is just the idea that you have to learn how to read between the lines. So if you see somebody in a show who decides that they're going to, that they slam a door, you're going to know that something probably isn't, that person probably isn't happy. So those are the kinds of things you're going to do in terms of reading between the lines. Then we're going to spend a little time talking about character and how you do character development and what you can learn by knowing something about a character and how in a story you have to develop the characters so that you can anticipate what they may or may not do in the story. Then we're going to talk about themes, and themes are kind of the idea that a story may have an idea that, say the subject of a story is about war, but the author may have a particular point of view or a particular idea that he wants to convey about war, like the lasting effects of war that aren't necessarily physical always after someone has been involved in that kind of an event. So that's theme. Then we're going to talk about style and point of view. So the style aspect of learning about fiction is just understanding that people will write stories in different ways. Sometimes people will write like, say, Hemingway, he uses very short sentences, very concise language, where you might compare that to somebody like Charles Dickens, and his writing is going to be very long-winded and lots of descriptions and very interesting, well-developed and very complicated storylines and characters. And then we'll also talk about point of view, which is basically whether the story is told from the first person point of view, that I'm telling you what I'm thinking, what I'm saying, and then reporting what other people are saying, but you don't always know what the other people are thinking. You only know what I'm thinking if I'm writing the story from first person point of view. You can also write a story just as an observer, as a narrator, and you can report what everybody's doing, but you don't always know what they're thinking. You have to learn more about the storyline and what's happening in the story by how they're behaving and maybe what their backstory is. Maybe you learn something about where they came from or where they grew up, or something about their home life situation, and that will lead you to understand what the point of view is. And then we'll end up talking about figurative language, which is a way of kind of reading between the lines, but it's more in terms of understanding metaphors and similes and ways of understanding fiction in the sense that authors oftentimes use different ideas to express different things. So if you say, he was like a rock, well, a person isn't really like a rock, but you learn something about that person based on what you think about in terms of a rock. So we are going to cover all of those areas in fiction, and those will be some of the ideas that they will be covering in the language arts test. And so the first thing we're going to talk about today is plot, and I want to just walk through the Kaplan exercises and see if we can't figure out what they're talking about. So the first thing I want to show you is, let's just take a very simple story that I think most people are familiar with and just see if we can figure out what the plot line is. And so I found this one online. It was kind of funny, and it's a story I think everybody knows, the Cinderella story. So you can see on the left-hand side here, it's sort of the misery and ecstasy is on the y-axis here, and the x-axis is over time. And so when you see the storyline here, or the events, this is basically like doing a storyboard. The first thing that happens is you see Cinderella. She has an awful life. She has evil sisters. And then all of a sudden, the storyline is starting to improve for her. She gets an invite to go to the ball. She makes clothes. She goes to the ball and she dances with the prince. So that's the next step in the events. And then, uh-oh, it's going to be midnight and she has to be back by midnight. So she has to go. But she actually leaves a slipper at the ball. And of course, we all know what happens from there. So she goes back to the same awful life, but it's not as sad as before because she does have this great experience with the prince. And then all of a sudden the prince shows up and finds her, and the slipper, the glass slipper, fits Cinderella, and he realizes that she's the one that he wants to be with. So the prince finds her and they live happily ever after. So that's the basic idea of the structure of a plot of a story. It's basically this happens, then this happens. In this case, we've got 4 or 5 events here. And so if you were relating that in terms of a movie, you would say they start off, they're living here and they go here and they do this, and then this happens, and then, oh my gosh, and then all of a sudden, they end up with a resolution. So that's the basic idea that we're trying to track here. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the Kaplan exercises, and we'll see if we can't figure out the plot elements in the stories that they talk about here. So plot refers to the events in a story. Generally, the events are told in order, but I said, as I said, Memento is a movie where actually the event that is the next event is actually the one that precedes it in time, which is kind of an interesting, I thought that was a pretty interesting movie. Understanding the order of events, what they're going to call the sequence of events, is to help you understand the cause and effects of what's happening. If you see something that happens before something else, you're going to draw some assumptions about the fact that something may have caused something else. In a story plot line, basically, you're going to have the introductory information about who the characters are, and then all of a sudden we're going to have some kind of conflict or problem that our hero or protagonist is going to have to solve. The conflict may be between characters, within a character, or between a character and nature, for instance. And actually, I would think of nature as one of the other characters in the story. When you think about it, think of the movie The Perfect Storm. I use that as an example. The storm itself is actually almost like one of the characters in the story. Or think of Jaws. You have the 2 or 3 people that are, I think there were 2 people on the ship in Jaws that were trying to track down the shark. But the shark itself ends up actually being a character in that show. So in any case, when we talk about plot, we're talking about the sequence of events. And one of the events that typically happens in a fictional story is that there's some kind of conflict or some kind of problem that our hero has to solve. And so the plot section of this in interpreting fiction is going to involve finding that sequence of events, identifying those, and then identifying what the conflict is that our hero or heroine has to resolve. So let's take a look at this first story here, and I'll go ahead and read, and you can follow along. Hopefully this will be, you'll have the ability to see this on your screen. So Robert didn't phone until evening. His voice was fatigued and thin. I've moved her to the university hospital, he said. They can't deal with it at home. Kate waited, saying nothing. She concentrated on the toes of her shoes. They needed shining. You never take care of anything, her mother would say. She has a tumor in her head. He said it firmly, as though Kate might challenge him. I'll take a plane tomorrow, Kate answered. I'll be there by noon. Robert exhaled. Look, he said, don't even come back here unless you can keep your mouth shut and do it my way. Robert, get to the point. The point is, they believe she has a malignancy and we're not going to tell her. I almost didn't tell you. His voice faltered. They're going to operate, but if they find what they're expecting, they don't think they can stop it. For a moment, there was no sound except an oceanic vibration of distance on the wire. Even that sound grew still. Robert breathed. Kate could almost see him in the booth at the hospital, staring straight ahead at the plastic instructions screwed to the narrow rectangular body of the telephone. It seemed to her that she was hurtling toward him. And this is an excerpt from a story called The Souvenir by Jane Ann Phillips. And it was written or published actually in 1979. So they ask us a couple of questions. And at the beginning, it says this excerpt, let me see if I can bring that down. This excerpt is about a brother and sister whose mother has a tumor. As you read, look for the order of events and the conflict. So the first question they ask is something about the order of events. When did Robert decide not to tell his mother about the tumor? Well, Robert decided to not tell his mother about the tumor before he even talked to Kate. Before talking to Kate, which is the first answer. After discussing the issue with Kate, actually, he never discusses whether or not he's going to tell his mother. And in fact, he says the point is they believe she has a malignancy and we're not going to tell her. So he's already telling his sister, we're not going to tell her about this. We think that she has a malignancy, it's a tumor, and we aren't going to tell her anything about it. So sequence of events. In this particular case, Robert has already decided he's not going to tell his mother, nor is he going to, he's telling his sister, but he's telling her actually just almost at the point of where they're going to be going in and doing an operation. The second question is, which of the following identifies a conflict in this excerpt? Well, if you look back and you see that Robert says, look, don't even come back here unless you can keep your mouth shut and do it my way. If someone said that to you, chances are you might take that as a challenge or as an upsetting moment. No one wants to be told that unless you do it my way, that's kind of the my way or the highway. So that establishes the conflict and the tension already in this excerpt from the story. So which of the following identifies a conflict in this excerpt? It's Kate tells Robert she will fly there tomorrow. Not really. I mean, that's not really a source of tension. She's just giving him some information. But the second answer, Robert tells Kate that she must do as he says, of course, is reason for Kate to feel tension about being told what to do. So in this case, the second answer is correct. Robert challenges Kate, and that creates tension in the story. So that's one of the things you want to spend time thinking about. What's happening? What is the sequence of events, and then what's causing the tension or the conflict in a story? Because there typically is going to be some kind of a problem or some kind of an issue or some kind of a conflict between a person and another person, between a person and his or her own conscience, or a person and something like if you get lost in a river, you've got nature to contend with. So we're going to be looking for those when we are starting to think about the plot in stories. So let me scroll down And I will go to the second excerpt that they have. And let's go ahead and read this one and see if we can figure out the answers to these questions as well. So this is an excerpt from a story called The Piece of String. The countryman looked at the mayor in astonishment, already terrified by this suspicion resting on him without knowing why. Me? I picked up the pocketbook? Yes, you yourself. On my word of honor, I never heard of it. But you were seen. I was seen? Me? Who says he saw me? Monsieur Malandain, the harness maker. The old man remembered, understood, and flushed with anger. Ah, he saw me, the clodhopper. He saw me pick up this string here, Mayor. And rummaging in his pocket, he drew out the little piece of string. But the mayor, incredulous, shook his head. You will not make me believe, Mitri Hutchcorn, that Monsieur Malandain, who is a man we can believe, mistook this cord for a pocketbook. The peasant, furious, lifted his hand, spat at one side to attest his honor, repeating, it is nevertheless God's own truth, the sacred truth. I repeat it on my soul and my salvation, the mayor resumed. After picking up the object, you stood like a stilt, looking a long while in the mud to see if any piece of money had fallen out. The old fellow choked with indignation and fear. He was confronted with Monsieur Malandain, who repeated and maintained his affirmation. They abused each other for an hour. At his own request, Maître Hutchcorn was searched. Nothing was found on him. Finally, the mayor, very much perplexed, discharged him with the warning that he would consult the public prosecutor and ask for further orders. So this story is actually from the collected novels and stories by Guy de Maupassant, which is a French name, and I don't speak French, so you can see that I'm a little handicapped reading this story. This story was actually copyrighted in 1922, which is, nearly 100 years ago, and was renewed in 1950. So this is a very old story, which is why the language is a little bit stilted for the way that we speak today, but we'll go ahead and answer the questions and see if we can figure out what questions they might have about this story. So the first question is, what was the peasant doing when he lifted his hand, spat at one side to attest his honor? And that, they say, is in paragraph 12. And if you look down on paragraph 12, you will find that you will see it right here, paragraph 12. The peasant, furious, lifted his hand, spat at one side to attest his honor, repeating, it is nevertheless God's own truth, the sacred truth. I repeat it on my soul and my salvation. So what was he actually doing? Was he thinking of striking the mayor? No, it doesn't say that he was going to be doing that. Was he pleading to the mayor for mercy? Not really. Was he performing a peasant ritual? No. But was he swearing that he was telling the truth? He says, it is nevertheless God's own truth, the sacred truth. So he's swearing that he is telling the truth. So B, in this case, has to be the correct answer. In the second question, how did the peasant react when confronted with Malandain, the harness maker? He became choked with fear and indignation. Well, let's see, where does he confront Malandain? He was confronted with Monsieur Malandain in paragraph 17, who repeated and maintained his affirmation. So the harness maker was continuing to repeat and maintain that what he saw was this peasant picking up this pocketbook. It says they abused each other for an hour. That, in common terms in this day and age, probably means that they sat and yelled at each other for the better part of an hour. At his own request, Maitre Hashkon was searched. Nothing was found on him. So let's see, what are the other options here? So he choked with fear and indignation? No. He tried to explain what had actually happened? Not really. What did he actually do? He, at his own request, he asked to be searched. He became respectful and subdued? Not really. It sounds like they had some words for each other. But D, confronted him and then asked to be searched, obviously has to be the right answer here. So in this case, he asked the mayor to actually search him because he knew that he had not stolen the pocketbook or had not picked it up. The third question says, which of the following statements best describes the conflict in this excerpt? So now we're looking, what is this? What is the conflict in this story? A town mayor is abusing his authority. Well, the mayor has just been asked to resolve this issue. I'm not sure he's actually abusing his authority in this case. He's just being asked to resolve an issue. He's being led to believe that somebody stole something and that he needs to resolve the issue. The peasant leads a harsh life and is often at odds with others. Well, that actually may be true, but that's not the conflict really that's taking place in this story. That might be the theme of this story. If there was a series of events that you would see that this peasant was exposed to this kind of thing over and over and over, it might lead to a theme being a peasant leads a harsh life and is often at odds with others. That's a possibility. But that isn't what the conflict is in this story. C is a peasant is accused of taking a pocketbook. Well, that actually is what has happened here. That is the conflict. This peasant has been accused of taking this pocketbook and we need to figure out if he actually took the pocketbook, and this is the confrontation between the accuser and the accused. And D, someone has lost a pocketbook with a great deal of money in it. That may or may not be true. We don't even know that actually from this, because we don't know if someone has actually lost their pocketbook. We just know someone has been accused of taking one. So again, C is going to be the correct answer. In this case, a peasant is accused of taking a pocketbook. And then the last question in this series of questions about this story involves putting these events or actions in order. So let's go ahead and I'll scroll down here a little bit and we can see what events they're talking about. So let's see if we can figure out which order these events take place. So the peasant and the harness maker argue. Well, we know that is someplace down here, almost near the end of the story. So we know that that's not number one. Let's see if we can identify which one is number one. The peasant explains that he picked up a piece of string, not a pocketbook. So that shows up near the top up here. That shows up right up here, but it's after he starts to explain, after the mayor has told him that he's been accused of picking up the pocketbook. So that's near the beginning of the story, but it's not exactly at the beginning of the story here. The mayor issues a warning to the peasant. Where does the mayor issue the warning to the peasant? Well, he actually issues that warning here down at the end of the story, which is finally the mayor, very much perplexed, discharged him with the warning that he would consult the public prosecutor and ask for further orders. So this is probably going to be the last event, and we know that this is probably near the bottom. So this is probably 4, this is probably 3, but let's see which one of these two is going to be number 1. The mayor states that the harness maker witnessed the peasant stealing the pocketbook. So that's up here at the very top. This is where he actually tells him that the harness maker the harness maker saw him. I was seen me, who says he saw me? So this actually, the mayor states the harness maker witnessed the peasant stealing the pocketbook is the first event in this story that they are trying to put these actions in a particular order. So this would be number one. This would be the first statement here would be number two. This would be number three, and the mayor issues a warning to the peasant would be actually number four. So I think we have the order of those elements of a story. So that's the kind of practice you want to do. If you start reading small, either short stories or, you can do that with anything really. You just want to get practice putting the events of what happens. You can even read newspaper stories. What happened first? What happened second? And then be able to recall after you read which action or which event took place first, second, third, fourth, because it's likely that you're going to see something on the reading test where they're going to want you to identify some kind of order of events. And then they may ask you, something about the conflict that's involved in the story. And we'll probably read some things out of ReadWorks where we can actually go back, and I'll ask you some questions about plot lines so that you get some practice doing that. The second thing that I wanted to do in this coursework is I want to introduce you to the Khan Academy grammar exercises, because I think it's really great. They're short. There's quite a bit of information, and you can actually go back on your own because Khan Academy is something you can use and refer back to. But I want to introduce you to the grammar exercises, and I want to spend some time at the very beginning talking about just parts of speech, because once we start to talk about verbs, you're going to want to know what a verb is. Otherwise, you won't know. If I say I need subject-verb agreement, you need to know what a subject is and what a verb is. So we want to understand some of the vocabulary. So I just want to introduce you right now to the very first Khan Academy grammar talk that David does. And I can give you the reference site. If you go to Khan Academy and type in grammar, this is the section that you will see. So let me go ahead and bring up the grammar. Okay, so we're going to be using the Khan Academy grammar exercises. And so tomorrow we are going to be talking about Unit 2 or Lesson 2, which is going to be about inferences. So I hope to see you then at 12:15. And at that point, we'll also continue with some of the grammar. Mostly we're going to start off with nouns, I think, tomorrow. So I hope to see you at 12:15 tomorrow, and have a great evening.